Hi friends! Again, we're back with what we read.
Yes, we are.
Like we said in the first one, since we made our comeback, we've read a lot of books since the time we
There's a nice little pile, little stack.
So I'm gonna kick things off per usual. Today I will be talking about a few books that I read digitally. We're gonna start with a series ender that I read finally. I can't believe I actually read the first trilogy of this bigger universe. The book in question is The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson, and that is the third book in the first Mistborn trilogy. It was so good. Like, I was so shocked about how much I love that book. I think it just brings that first trilogy together so well and like concludes it so perfectly. I can't really tell you about the plot of that one because obviously spoilers for 1 and 2, but essentially The Final Empire, which is the first book, centers around a young girl named Vin. She is discovered early on by a man named Kelsier because she shows the ability to be a Mistborn like him, which means that in this world, this magic system consists of being able to manipulate metals. Yeah. To use metals, sorry.
To use metals to manipulate like the environment. Yeah. So you can burn different types of metals in order to jump higher
or soothe people's feelings, so on and so
read
forth.
People's minds.
There's a whole like structure to it.
And people like you ingest it. You ingest the metal, and you just burn it and you metabolize it. It's pretty cool.
Most people can only do one metal. Yeah. But Mistborns are actually capable of doing multiple metals. In fact, all of them. And so Kelsier picks Vin up from, you know, where she was living at that time.
Dusts her off.
Decides to train her, basically, and she gets involved in his plan to overthrow the Empire.
That's correct.
In this book. And that's essentially what the entire first book is about, and the second book and the third book are the consequences that follow after that. The time jumps between them are pretty large, like it's a year. Yeah, it's a year, and I think the next one is also a year. A lot of stuff happens in them, and a lot of big stuff happens in the third book. All the details you didn't see at first in the first couple of books where you were kind of like, why are they talking about this? Why is this being mentioned again? They all really come together in the third book in a way that even I was kind of like, okay, I can see how this makes sense, but I for some reason, my brain was just like not putting it together, and it's like,
that's cool. Okay,
I think that's so fascinating.
That's making me look forward to 1 and 2.
I actually, when I was reading it, it kind of gave me the same vibes that I had when I read/watched The Two Towers and The Return of the King. There are very specific things that happen in both those Lord of the Rings novels that remind me a little bit of what happens in this one, especially because the entire vibe of this is like, it seems completely hopeless. Like, there's no way to fix it. Like, it's gonna be the end of the world as everyone knows it.
And then at the 11th hour.
And at the 11th hour, literally, like, the twist happens, things happen, and you're just like,
yeah, I'm not doing anything at all today. I'm just gonna read those 10.
And the funnier thing to me was, like, at the beginning, the first 2 books, I already loved this cast of characters because I'm a sucker for stories with like big groups of people who they pretend they don't care about each other, but they really care about each other, or like they grow together
and then thrust them into something as terrible as a rebellion.
I was like freaking emotional the entire time because like I cared so much about what had happened to these stupid people. Like, stupid because I mean I love them, but sometimes they make very ill-advised decisions. I just cared so much about the outcome of all their stories, and it ended so well. I was super emotional about it, and I was not expecting that at all, considering like
10 out of 10 you'd make an anime?
Probably, actually it would be a great anime.
There you go.
It was very good. I think it's a very solid conclusion to this trilogy. It kind of just like gives me a greater appreciation for 1 and 2, having gotten to the ending and like seeing how he was like, oh, by the way, this thing that I mentioned like, you know, a couple of books ago, it's actually relevant. You just didn't notice it. I'm like, the fact that he pulled one over on me, I was just like, okay, fine.
Darn it.
I can see why everyone thinks you're a good storyteller. It was really, really good. Really enjoyed that. A complete departure from that, however, is a book called Meg and Joe, and I'm really excited to talk about this one. This one is a recent release by Virginia Contra, and she basically modernized the story of Little Women. The first book.
Oh, Meg and Joe.
Yes. The first book centers around the 2 older sisters, Meg and Joe, and everyone else is still there. Basically, she modernized it by putting them in our world, in our time. Joe, she's a blogger in this one, and she writes about food, and she lives in New York. And then Meg is still in their small town. She's married, she has 2 kids, so she's trying to be like the, you know, a good mom and a good wife. She tackles both of their stories in a way where these ladies, like after their dad has come home, after all of that has happened, they're still trying to carve out their own futures and trying to figure out like what to do. Joe in particular is at a loss because like the thing she thought she wanted and that she was doing so well, which was to become a news writer, not happening for her, and so now she's on this different path and she's like not sure that this is what she should do. And then Meg, on the other hand, she's trying so hard to be a good mom and a good wife and good everything that she basically is just not giving herself time to do anything outside of that. And so it's interesting because like you're so mad at them for making choices that are so bad. Sometimes you're like, why are you doing this? But you get it because they're being fueled by their own like doubts about themselves, fears about the future, their own understandings of relationships and how they should work. That always influences the choices they make. Like Meg never wants to let her husband know that she's struggling and having a hard time, and she wants to be like the do-it-all kind of mom.
That's terrible.
I thought it was so interesting because she gave it to me in a way where like I didn't remember caring so much about every single one of them and their stories like this, but she did it so well that I was just like, I really care about what Meg is going, like what's going to happen to Meg. I care about how Jo is going to figure out her future. I care about what Beth and Amy are doing. Like it was so good, and it just
the March sisters.
She just did such a good job capturing the same sort of spirit and family dynamic that Little Women does have. She has all these like little details that if you have never read the original, it'll probably just like pass over your head, but if you have read it, you'll be like, you'll be like that. I think she did such an incredible job with it, and I'm so glad that I got the chance to read it, and I'm so excited that she's doing another book and it's going to be Beth and Amy's story. It's going to be so good. Like I am just waiting for it because there's something I like. I never thought I would be on board with this one thing, but I'm now just like, it needs to happen in that book. It just needs to, like the end. So yes, highly recommend checking that one out as well. And then a complete departure from that, back to something sort of similar to the Mistborn series. I finally got around to reading The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is the first book in his Gentleman Bastard series, and I knew I was going to like it. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. That entire story revolves around a character named Locke Lamora, and he happens to be part of a band of thieves. And they have basically made their living by pulling off heists, incredible heists, because they're all incredibly talented.
Very nice
thieves. Instead of being like the normal pickpockets on the street, they do long haul cons. Like they do it for like years and months at a time, and they have benefited from it.
So basically Ocean's 11.
Yes. But the problem in this one is that there is a new player who has come to town, and he's kind of wreaking havoc. So much so that he's garnered the attention of the gang lords, as well as the political structure of that city, like the political leaders. And Locke finds himself stuck in this game where he has to outsmart that character in order to, you know, get away unscathed and also, you know, keep his con running. And it's like this, it's funny to me because like at the beginning I was a little bit hesitant because of the way the first chapter prologue type part is. It's a little bit setup-y, but it kind of makes sense because you get to see how like where Locke's origins are and how he comes to become this person who is now leading this group of gentleman bastards into these crazy cons. Like they're insanely planned down to the last detail.
That's cool.
It's so funny because it's like a story that there's a heist, sure. There's also like gang wars in there. There's also like crazy escapades going on, and I'm just like, it's like the combination of all the things that I find particularly delicious in stories like that.
Yeah,
so I was just like, and plus Locke is exactly the kind of character I enjoy. He can be charming and he can be very, very well spoken and well versed, but he's also like a freaking rogue that will just literally be like, yeah, I pulled that, bye. And just swings out of there. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's exactly my type of character and I enjoyed him so much. But what I also particularly loved about this is that once again, it's like a little found family and they love each other so much. They're a group of males that basically grew up together, and it's like watching them is like, oh, found family, it's so great. You guys have each other's backs all the time. Like, it's so good. It's funny because it's like this series of events takes place over the course of like, I want to say like 2 weeks. It's not even a very long period of time, but like there's so much that happens, and Scott Lynch definitely does not hold back. Like, people die, things go horribly wrong, as they will in most stories. It just does it in a way that's so entertaining and so much fun. Like, I flew through the last half of the book, like, because I just needed to know if they were going to successfully do what they were planning to do. At the heart of it, this is just a story about a gang of thieves who are trying their best to stay out of trouble, you know, unless they're causing the trouble themselves, and avoid dying, because, you know, we'd all like that very much. It's very entertaining, it's very fun. I could see it being a great, like, TV series or a movie, too, just because of the way the action scenes would play out in it. Is a very good read, and I'm so glad I read it. I actually read it because Kristen from Super Space Chick was hosting, like, a read-along for it in November, but I read it ahead of everyone else because I was just like, I can't stop reading this once I started. It was just that good. So highly recommend it. I'm definitely looking forward to reading the second book.
So brief foray into normal contemporary non-magical worlds. Every so often David Baldacci is a go-to of mine. I coined his approachable assassins genre, where, you know, you've got hitmen from the CIA that are just relatable relatable in some way, form, or fashion, and then you sort of feel for them and want to know what happened. His recent book called Long Road to Mercy is about a completely new character. I think it's one of his newest characters ever, and every so often he'll throw one out. It centers around an FBI agent named Atlee Pine, and she has a pretty rich sort of background, I want to say.
Okay.
You know, she was almost an Olympic weightlifter, and she's obviously full-fledged FBI agent. She's super strong. She does MMA, so she's basically a badass.
Powerhouse,
Yeah,
basically.
she's a different powerhouse. Even more of like a darker turn. Her twin sister at the age of 6 was abducted from her room. And she
that's
survived,
scary.
like a serial murderer, or at least that was that's in her head. It was a serial murderer. You know, played a game of eeny, meeny, miny, mo, clubbed her on the head, and took
my
her
God,
sister
that's
instead.
crazy.
So that's her backstory. That's exactly why she's an FBI agent, which I feel will be the longer thread. Like David Baldacci likes to center on a character and sort of have a personal thread run through a series of 3 or 4 or 5 books, maybe,
And then it gets
before the
resolved
personal thing
eventually?
gets resolved, while the mission du jour presents itself. The only problem that I had with this series, because basically the story was she investigates a death in the Grand Canyon where she's sort of based. I think she's based in Arizona, and suddenly things spiral into national security levels, which is classic David Baldacci. It's like the fate of the known world lies in the hands of this 1 or 2 people. But I don't necessarily feel like he's maybe done well for this particular book. And I've seen him write strong female characters before, like for example Jessica Reel, who was in the Bill Robbie series. She is one of the approachable assassins.
Yeah, you mentioned her
she's
before.
actually one of the best snipers, if not the best sniper in the CIA, apart from being a great Wet Works agent. I know he can do it, like without being too pandery.
Maybe he's doing it on purpose then.
We'll see, and that's the other thing that sort of rubs me a little bit wrong. I mean, I know we're in a different era where we're trying to empower women and stuff like that, but you can not be on the nose about it. E.g., whenever any woman says we're 2 badass women, I feel it has to be earned within the narrative, not in their lives and what they prove to themselves, but I feel like the narrative has to position things in such a way that it makes complete sense that character would say even and by the way, it was the tiny little office assistant who is also, by the way, is a badass, just letting but for her to just whip that out as though that was like part of her vernacular, I'm just like, this isn't a word that I feel you would use, but I guess I didn't make you as a character, so this made sense. And that's it. Like otherwise, she's like everyone's she's like Supermom. So it just, to me, I'm just like, so that's my only like issue. It feels a little pandery, if that's even a word. Where I'm just like, we're gonna empower these women, they're super awesome. I'm like, they already are, dude. You don't have to say it. Like, the more you have to say something, you don't say you're a badass when you already are. You just it's like, so anyway, so that's my only problem. It's a little pandery as usual. She resolves things, the character resolves things in a way that I'm just like, all right, that's fine. I mean, even the ending was a little kind of so you can hold that over the heads of people and it just all works out fine. So maybe not. See, that's different. Like for the other assassin books, it was fine. So I wasn't too crazy about that. But for now, I'm reading the second book because I want to know what happens next. Will she ever find her sister?
Writing, I assume.
I do. I just didn't like what he did with Atlee's first book, but I am reading the second one now, so we'll see how that goes. I mean, who took Mercy away? By the way, that's the name of
I
her
think
sister.
actually maybe that's the thing that'll.
Yeah, I just want to like. Story. I just like who abducted Mercy, and is she still alive? Like that would
be interesting, wouldn't it?
It would. In direct contrast to that about how I loved absolutely everything and didn't expect anything at all. Kings of the Wild. Alexa reviewed this a couple of videos back. 3, maybe 4, 5, 6 videos back.
Tell them our pitch line for us.
For those of you who play Dungeons and Dragons, Alexa has lovingly called this book. It's as if this book reads like an entire Dungeons and Dragons game where people only rolled natural 1s and natural 20s. For those of you who don't know what that means, a natural 1 in a Dungeons and Dragons game pretty much means that if you think, because in the game you have to roll dice in order to sort of win. When you roll a 1, you obviously lose what you were trying to do or what you were trying to avoid.
Splendidly.
But because it's a 1, the game master just makes it worse because that's just your fate now. However, if you roll a 20, which is the highest you can roll on the dice,
it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. It's you think it was good, it's gonna be even better. And when I read this book, I'm just like, holy crap, these are just natural 1s and 20s all throughout the book. And
in a way that doesn't feel too contrived either. It just happens.
And the thing is, and I thought, yeah, I'll pick it up. I mean, you know me, I have no expectations when it comes to these books because I don't read like high fantasy, and unless it's a little more adventurous, and that's it. So when I read this thing, it's so fun. The characters are so great. There are a bunch of aging mercenaries that have retired but have to come out of retirement because one of them, their former leader, well, their front man. You know, he needs all of their help for a very critical family rescue mission. Putting our main character, I want to say Clay Cooper, who is technically not the face of the band, but is actually technically the de facto leader, meaning he's the solid base of the entire thing. Yep. Everything hinges on him. He's the stable one. So the story centers on him. He's such a great character. I love him so much. He's not the greatest communicator because that's their leader's job. But
I don't think any of them are great at communicating except their leader. And even their leader's not that great.
That's true. It's like The Expendables meets Dungeons and Dragons meets good writing. That's how... No offense to Dungeons and Dragons or The Expendables. But you have to focus on good writing here because the characters are so... You just love them. You just love these schmucks so much. And then I would 10 out of 10 watch it. Like a 6-part Netflix miniseries on these guys. I would. And you know, it's meets the hint of Ocean's 11 because there's that scheming. These are grown ass old men.
And I think that's what makes it more entertaining.
And I don't read about that. Like that's not the kind of demographic that I read, but I care about these guys so much. So
they're a great band.
Happy to recommend this to anybody who loves any of the things we just mentioned because it's such a great. So I'm also going to read the second book.
So the last part of this video is something that Mackie will join me on a little bit later, but I'm going to talk about an entire series. Through the months of October and November, I reread The Cruel Prince. Also reread The Wicked King. I also reread The Lost Sisters, which is the novella in between those two.
In preparation for
The Queen of Nothing, which came out in November. So let's start with The Cruel Prince, because that's the only one we can talk about without spoilers. The Cruel Prince is the story of Jude, who is a mortal girl that was taken away to Fairy at a very young age. And growing up in Fairy, what she wants to do is find a place where she can be in a position of power and belonging in that world. And so
without getting like murdered or like
tricked or used or anything like that. So this first book is entirely a game of strategy for Jude. She is the chess piece on this board.
It's a lot of mind
she
games
tries
and
to
bullying.
claim the queen, basically. Like she tries to be the winner of this entire thing for herself. And you know, it's a good strategy game. As you might know if you've read the first book, Jude is unexpectedly resourceful when it comes to making important moves that will further her position.
Right, which and I feel like an important linchpin to this whole thing is that Jude didn't just come to Fairy out of nowhere.
Oh yeah.
Let's just say the household that she is part of has some kind of leverage and has given her some kind of leverage to allow herself to maneuver and position herself. So that's super cool.
In my notes, what I said was the interesting thing for me about experiencing The Cruel Prince again was that it reminded me that this book is really basically just the reader getting to spend a lot of quality time with Jude. You really get to know both her fears and her strengths, and you kind of see how she is reacting to any of those things. So when it comes to things that scare her or make her feel too deeply sad or afraid,
good or happy,
she tends to like push that away because she's just like, I can't, because I have to be strong and I have to be unafraid. And
that's right.
She thinks that having this power or a position of power over other people is going to be the solution to all her problems. I did not even realize how much this book also delves into her relationships with other people, because there's so much in here and it's so rich when it comes to that. And we actually discussed that a lot in the live show we did for The Cruel Prince, which I'll just put a link to down below. Mackie joined us for that one, so that was fun. The Wicked King is the sequel, and it basically is the fallout of what happened at the end of the first book and Jude dealing with that fallout. Reading this for the second time was an interesting experience for me because I still thoroughly enjoyed it, but I also could see like things that I hadn't noticed before in it. Like I was paying more attention, I think, to like little details and clues that had been dropped all throughout it, which was so interesting. This one reads so fast though, because there's like, it just doesn't stop. Like there's so many things going on.
And the stakes are too high for you to even begin to slow down. Like,
and then you get to like the ending of it and you're like, I had to wait over a year, okay, to read this, to read.
I will say this about The Wicked King though, as far as having that high octane speed to it, Holly Black really does that very well.
She does.
Where it's a freight train from 0 to 100 in like 60 seconds, and yet at the same time you immediately still understand what happens on the inside of Jude, and it's really a huge exploration on consequence.
Speaking of consequences, we're now going to talk about The Queen of Nothing.
Yes, we are.
No spoilers, of course. I expected it to be a 5-star book, and it was only a 4-star book for me. I liked a lot of this, and I enjoyed a lot of it. I loved seeing like how these characters ended up at the end of their story. But at the same time, I feel like there were certain things about the story that I wish had it been done that way. And that's just personal preference more than anything. I can't say what they are because spoilers, but there are a lot of things about the story where I was kind of like, I'd rather have seen something different done to get them to that ending, but
yeah,
overall, for the most part, still very entertaining, still compulsively readable. Like, I could not put it down. Entirely
finish
worth it for
day.
freaking chapter 21. Chapter 21, guys, chapter 21.
It's chapter 21.
What I liked about this book is that we get a lot more involvement from the other characters outside of Jude.
Yeah.
I think it's still important that the story definitely centers around Jude and her fears and self-doubts and like what she wants to do to guarantee her future is set. It also features a lot of the other characters that weren't necessarily such a big focus in the second book. So a lot of them show up again here or play bigger parts here, and it's interesting. The highlight for me of this story is essentially just seeing how Jude and Carden's thing plays out. It's very interesting, and I also really like seeing how her relationship with Maddox plays out in this one as well. They've come so far from where they were in The Cruel Prince to where they are in The Queen of Nothing. I would have liked it maybe if book 2 and book 3 had just been one book, because I feel like this feels like the other half of the second book. She could have put them together instead of keeping them apart. I feel like that way I would have probably liked the entire story a little better. So in case you couldn't tell, The Cruel Prince is still my favorite book of the series. I still think that's the strongest book in the series. Even though I enjoyed everything else, I feel like that book is still the strongest and can stand on its own. And no matter how many times I read it, I'll still be very like impressed. This is not to say that I didn't enjoy The Queen of Nothing, because I did. Plus, one of my random theories about it was right, so I'm not gonna say what it is, but if you watch the Wicked King live show, I say that this is a super wildcard theory, and guess who was right? I screamed when it happened. I was like,
I was there.
Oh, by the way, this book, there is a quote in it that I'm still like, it's like one line. I'm not gonna say what it is because it's a spoiler if you've never read it, but like,
it summarizes the entire, you know, and everybody
loves it. Literally summarizes that character.
Here's the thing, right? So this has been lovingly told to me as one of the best hate to love scenarios, love stories, tropes, pretty much in the history of ever that involved fairies or even any other magical creature. And fine, agreed. And those lines are connected to sort of strengthening that trope. Good. Cruel Prince, I feel, was a cleaner book because it was a smaller world.
Yeah. And
what I appreciate about Holly Black is both her ability to weave plot, including backstories, to weave lore, which trigger the plot, and then of course how she weaves character relationships. Those are always the three kind of main things that make any great story great. Cruel Prince, all of those were sort of tiny little circles.
Yeah.
When you bring it to the larger world that is now Queen of Nothing, were the payoffs where they were supposed to be? I think so. Like to Alexa's point, was the journey to the payoff of all of the relationships, all of the lore, all of the plot kind of buildups? Sure, maybe not the greatest, but then it's hard. I mean, realistically speaking, I mean, who are the few people who have done this quote unquote perfectly? Rick Riordan, J.K. Rowling, right?
Cassandra Clare.
Cassandra.
I was just thinking of City of Heavenly Fire, and that just hurt my soul.
Cassandra Clare.
Oh, and Sarah.
God, Sarah. There you go.
I would say Alex for Darkest Minds. I think.
Yeah, and so because it's such a precarious thing. How do you keep a plot going while keeping the lore clean, and at the same time making sure that the relationships still make sense?
I also think it's because it's a choice between making sure that the focus is still on Jude's story, because it is Jude's story. This entire saga is about Jude and her journey. While a bigger world obviously is something she's concerned about, and that makes like a lot of... I only just came to this conclusion now. While it's definitely a big part of her story, that's not necessarily what the focus is on, because we're trying to focus on Jude's character journey.
And in which case, I think she did well.
Yeah,
she played
if we were going to focus on that, I think like it worked, because Jude's character journey
it's just a large. It's you know, it's the entire fate of fairy. I mean, it's just huge. Not that I like fairy or care what happens to it.
You're just like,
you know, but
could live without it.
But Holly Black does a great job. Now, again, could the payoffs been a little bit more invested in, or could it have gone a different way? Sure, there's always room for sort of improvement.
There's something in particular that I would have liked more of, but
whatever. Like either way, it still gets. I would give it about a full 4 stars as well. It lands it on a good note at the very least.
Of all the series enders I've read from her, of which there are 2, this one and the other one. This is a better one.
It's not me sobbing like at the end of the day the way I did reading, you know, Deathly Hallows, but it's satisfying enough that I'm
landing.
But it's satisfying enough that I'm like, all right, fine, cool.
Especially
we can move on. I have no complaints really. Oh, that epilogue, but whatever.
That epilogue was so funny.
So yeah, I hate fairies in general, just because I just can't. But then with this, I'm like, no, there's no pretense here. She immediately says that fairies are terrible creatures, and I'm like, okay, I can.
You can get behind
There's no romanticized. Oh, the land under the hill or whatever the hell. No, they're just terrible, all of them.
It's cool though,
I can
because she
get with
does that
this.
thing where like it's right between the middle, where they're terribly attractive, but they're also terrible.
No, just yeah. I mean, they're attractive to maybe some of them, but overall, they're just horrible. They're who they are, and I'm
Unapologetically
and
so.
unapologetically so, and I can get down with that. Like I'm all
Same.
right.
Those are the kinds of
if
fairies
we're cool
I
to understand that nobody's saying they're awesome, you can admire them, sure, but they know they're jerks. So cool, that works.
Fun. So, fun time reading that series. That is the end of this What We Read video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have Queen of Nothing feelings, be sure to share them in the comments. If there are spoilery things, try to be considerate and also say that in your comment.
Happy to talk spoilers as long as
yeah.
there's like a spoiler thing and people can just whatever, but
Other than that, we hope you guys have been reading well, and if you have read any of the other things in this video, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
And we will see you guys with another What We Read very soon.
soon, bye.
Bye.